Okay, welcome, Eyes of the Wheel. Today I have Colin joining us, and I met him through King of Hearts, which is an non for profit that focuses on bringing safe spaces so we can open up, be vulnerable, and just connect with each other on a deeper level. So I'm very grateful that I met him, and especially because we have something in common. We are both mixed race. And we ended up talking about race a bit, and he is very passionate about race. And so I was really interested in learning more. And I also think that this is a really powerful topic for all of us to hear about, especially in this time, and to understand a little bit more about. So, anyways, I'm excited for this conversation. I'm very grateful that he's joining me today. So, welcome, Colin.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's get started in the beginning. So when you were younger, and let us know what races you are. I'm half Chinese, half British and Scottish. And yeah, we'll have Colin share what races he is and then how it yeah, kind of what that kind of meant to him at a younger age.
Sure. Yeah. My ethnic background is Indigenous, Jamaican, Irish, and French. Quite the mix, but yeah. And in terms of what they meant to me when I was younger, I had no idea. Um, I, I, I grew up in a white household, so it was very difficult to navigate through what it meant to be mixed race.
Mhm.
I would hear racial terms and things like that, but I wouldn't quite understand the power of those words because I always thought I was white.
Mhm.
So they didn't affect me when I was younger.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's totally fair, and I can relate with that, since my mom came over well, not her, but her parents came over from China, and their whole, mission was just to get her to assimilate into the white culture so they could be successful here, so a lot of my Chinese background is really lost to me. I really don't know much of it at all, and she can kind of understand the language, but I feel disconnected from it too, and it was very white, like my household as well growing up. So yeah, I hear you on that. And you were talking about when we chatted before this idea of color blindness and what does that mean and how did that affect you?
Um, I first started like reflecting back on on my life. I first started to realize that I was kind of a victim of color blindness because my mom, my biological mother, would always say like she doesn't see race, she doesn't see color, she's not racist. But then she would associate with people that were clearly racist. I would hear the racial slurs, I would hear the negative talk about black people or Asian people, or I was brought up to see that there was no color.
Right.
Everyone is equal, and that isn't the case. That's not reality. So
Right. Right. That's almost like the ideal that we all want to be at, but it's like we have to get to terms with the fact that it's not like that and we can't just jump to that space of, oh, we're all equal and woohoo, because that's very not real for many races.
exactly.
And it's just like, it's kind of like linking to me when you say that this term of like spiritual bypassing, it's kind of like racial bypassing. Like,
Mhm.
hey, let's just not actually acknowledge what's going on and just sit up here in this higher realm of like, oh, we're all equal. Like,
Yeah,
but honestly, that doesn't help people feel heard or actually help change happen on like a real cellular level. So
yeah. It's
I
easier
hear
to
you.
dismiss. It's easier to dismiss issues like that,
Right.
so there's no controversy. But
Absolutely.
that brings about controversy when you kind of sweep it under the rug. So
Right. I totally hear what you're saying. Yeah, it's very confusing because your mom's almost like trying to say it's a good thing, that we're all equal and I see it that way and this and that. And it's like color blindness, is a good thing, right? Because we're all equal. But then you're seeing this discrepancy and you're like, well, that doesn't feel right. And there's something that's being missed here and not, I don't know, I guess addressed authentically.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I hear you. So you're growing up and you're like, okay, I'm in this white household. This is how it goes. And then what happened? What like sparked this passion for you to understand yourself and race more?
Well, I think I think it started in about grade 4 when I ended up moving in with my father. Um, and I was out on the playground after school one day, and a little white boy called me the N word,
Oh,
and I had no idea. Like in the summer, I get pretty dark, and I'm just like, well, I just tan easily,
yeah,
right? So, um, but he ended up calling me the N word, and I was so upset by it, and I asked my dad, why is he calling me that? I'm white.
right.
And so then my dad is like, well, here's the story. You're not.
Uh,
And
yeah.
so from then on, I was kind of intrigued. I didn't really dive into it, but
Hmm.
I was more so intrigued
Hmm.
by what that meant.
Hmm.
And so years go on, I get to high school, and I get lumped in with, like, I played football, I played lacrosse, I played rugby, I played all these sports, and I always got lumped in with with the black athletes.
Okay.
But I didn't really understand at that point because I'm very light skinned, so
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand why I'm being lumped in with the black athletes when I should be over there with the white athletes. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that it kind of went back and forth with that until university, and then university I started diving into the history of things, and um, it really kind of sparked my interest in getting to know who I was as a person in terms of my color and my background. So
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's very interesting. Like, as you say, like you get to high school now, there's this very clear distinction. Like you're black or you're white, and there's like these sides almost.
yeah.
And I can relate with that because it's like, well, I can't be in the Chinese side or the white side because I'm in both. So
Mhm.
now what, right? Like now that you're not fitting in a container or a side, it's like now you feel like the odd one out and you're not fully accepted anywhere,
Yeah.
um, or fully rejected anywhere. So it's kind of this weird center space. And then at university, you were mentioning earlier that what were the specifics, like people you met or experiences you had that really sparked that race interest for you?
Yeah, so it wasn't until my education degree. Um, I got a lot of historical kind of information from my undergrad, but then it wasn't until my education degree, and I got to be around like-minded people that were curious
Okay.
or had lots of knowledge. And
Mhm.
so the African descent coordinator and the indigenous coordinator, I became really close with them, and I learned a lot of valuable lessons about race and inequalities and
Mm,
inequities and things like that that I didn't really. There was like a blanket over me. I would say that I didn't see it. I knew they existed, but I didn't see it. So out of sight, out of mind kind of mentality.
yeah.
And they truly brought those issues to the forefront for me, and I really got to just talk to them about what racism meant to them or what prejudice meant to them. And um because being indigenous and black,
Yeah.
it's two different spectrums but the same racism. So
Mm. Okay. Yeah, that's totally fair. And was there any like big things that jumped out at you, like right at the beginning, that you were kind of just like shocked by that you didn't know that you were kind of being woken up to, I guess?
yeah, so where I'm from, like in back in New Brunswick, We
Yeah.
don't talk about residential schools. We don't talk about any of that.
Yeah.
Um, and really, in my neighborhood growing up, weren't really any Indigenous kids. So when I get to my education degree, so fast forward 20 some years, and I'm hearing about residential schools for the first time,
Right.
and
Okay.
I'm just like, holy cow! Like this actually happened, you
Right.
know? So like just hearing those stories, and the Indigenous coordinator, her father was actually in residential schools,
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
so she really got to speak to what that meant, and how that affected him, and how it affected her, and how it affected the family, because
Mhm.
you are stripped of everything that you are in a residential school, which I didn't know. I didn't know it was
Right.
that severe.
Right.
And so he ended up actually taking his own life because of residential schools. So it changed who he was. He wasn't the loving father that he was, like he could be. He was very cold, very isolated, um, and so yeah, he ended up taking his own life because of it. So
Yeah, that's really hard to hear.
yeah, so that story in particular stuck with me because obviously I care about the person, and to know that through my education I never learned about that. I never and that's part of who I am, right? And so that was tough to hear, and tough to dive into.
Mhm. Yeah, that's totally fair. Like, you're just kind of understanding now all these things about who you are that you had no idea about, and it's
Yeah.
whoa. And I know I have a long way to go with understanding my Chinese history. Um, but history is so important, hey, because it's really, like, really builds up everything that we are in this moment. Like, this moment is like a total totality, I guess, of the past. Like, every thought, feeling, whatever happened in the past, it like lives with us and it lives in us right now. Um, so
It creates that generational trauma
yeah,
that a lot of people don't think exists, but
right.
um, it definitely does exist. So
Mm-hmm. I definitely 100% agree that generational trauma is a big, big thing. It's a big
mhm.
yeah. Yeah. So we really gotta look back before we can look forward, hey?
Yep, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so here we are now in how things are, and there's been some movements and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And with myself, like I've seen it happen. I don't know a lot about what's going on. It's challenging to just see the media or just see like everybody's opinions about it, but maybe it's just coming from the media.
Mhm.
So I guess like I'd like to hear from you more about the history, like movements that have happened. What has come of that? I don't know what it means, whatever you want to speak to on that.
Yeah, so something that I've really been diving into, um, more more so lately, I think the last couple months, um, I bought the book, The New Jim Crow, and it talks about history of slavery and incarceration and all these different things, and including movements. And one
Okay.
thing that I came across was the bus boycott, with Rosa Parks. So it it kind of made me want to learn more, and so I dove into it. And Rosa Parks actually wasn't the first person to do the whole um, front of the bus, right? There was two individuals before her at least
I
that.
need to take that a little deeper. I'm not sure about the bus and
Oh, the bus boycott. So basically, Rosa Parks, colored woman,
yeah,
sat at the front of the bus, and during that time, you weren't allowed to sit
what
at the front of
was
the
it
bus.
around?
What's that?
What year was it around?
I think that was in the, gosh, 60s,
Okay. Okay.
70s maybe.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so she couldn't sit at the front of the bus. So they always black people had to sit at the back. So she ended up sitting at the bus, refusing to move, got in trouble. But there were, and then that's what we see in history right now. We see Rosa Parks. We hear about Rosa Parks
Okay.
and her bravery. But there were two individuals at least before that
Okay.
that did the exact same thing, but they didn't fit the mold. So Rosa Parks was middle to upper class, or
Okay.
had connections to middle to upper class. So
Okay.
she was seen as the the best face of the movement,
Right.
right? Whereas the previous people, they were screaming and yelling, and one was I believe a 16-year-old that was pregnant. So during that time, that's
Okay.
also not okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so the NAACP, so the Black organization in America, decided we're not going to have these individuals be the face of the movement. We're going to have Rosa Parks because she
Mm,
is proper. She has the
mm,
connections. So we want her to be the face.
mm,
So
mm.
that to me is they're dictating the struggle. They're dictating who is going to be a part of that movement, right? And it's just,
Oh,
to me, it's unfair that
absolutely.
we're picking and choosing who is going to represent the movements,
Mhm.
right? And same with Martin Luther King Jr. His marches and his speeches, well, those stemmed from Emmett Till, right? And if it wasn't for Emmett Till's mom, so Emmett Till, if you don't know who that
Yeah,
is, he was,
little more depth.
yeah. So Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy. I believe he was from Chicago. Went down to the South to visit his cousins, to visit his relatives, and he was accused of. While he was there, he was accused of whistling at a white woman.
Okay.
So this was probably around the same time as the Rosa Parks stuff.
Okay.
And so the white woman then went and told her husband.
Mm,
And so her husband and a couple of his friends decided to go and remove Emmett Till from his family's house. And there was nothing they could do because they were people of color. So there was nothing they
wow.
could do. So they took him out and they actually tortured him and murdered him
Wow.
at 14 years old
Right.
for whistling at a white woman. So the he was brought back to Chicago, and his mother had an open casket to see what the men did
Right.
to to her son,
Wow.
and so that sparked Martin Luther King, and that created that movement that white people in the South and that racism and trying to tear that down, break down those barriers. Um, so there's always a story behind the story.
I see.
So so it's important to do the research and not settle for what the media wants us to see.
Right. So then it sparked Martin Luther King, and then what did Martin Luther King do?
So he
Oh,
did his marches. He
okay.
I don't necessarily I know I might I don't necessarily believe in everything Martin Luther King Jr. did.
Okay. Okay.
Um, he had, in my opinion, unrealistic expectations on society. We
Okay.
do not live in a utopian society. There's no way that we're all going to like each other, black, white, Asian,
Okay.
whoever.
Yeah.
Um, so I think he had some unrealistic expectations, but he did create the movement. He did create a spark for people to want to stand up for for who they were in terms of their race.
Okay.
So I think that's the important point to take from the Martin Luther King movement,
Right.
and his marches, his speeches, and things like that. But I
Mhm.
mean, if you dive into it, I mean, there's lots of negative about Martin Luther King as well, right? He was a womanizer. He was
Mhm.
things like that. So it's like
Mm.
you gotta really dive into it and know who is being put at the forefront of the movements.
Right. Right. To not just take like a few sentences you hear, or like one thing and be like, "That's it. That's the guy. Thank gosh for him," and all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, I guess what was coming up for me just listening to you is that, like, it's almost like you are, but society as a whole almost feels like they're not ready for, like, the depth of darkness that's actually gone on. Like, the and it's like we can pick the one that we can handle right now. Like, we can
Yeah.
handle, I think you said Rosa was her name. We can
Rosa Parks. Yeah.
Yeah, we can handle Martin Luther King. We can't handle, like, young boy getting murdered by white family.
Yeah.
And it's like it almost, I don't know much about all of it, but just hearing you, it sounds like it's almost like I don't know much about if the media is mostly run by white perspective or that type of thing, but, like, if it is, it almost seems like that they're not ready to fully acknowledge, like, the depth of what they've actually done. It's almost like saying Martin Luther King is like, "Oh, he's so great, he's doing all this stuff to, like, rise everybody up," but they're not willing to almost acknowledge that, like, well, you people and this type of perspective you had, like, murdered people. Like, it's
Yeah.
almost like it's just like focusing on what's easy to handle instead of like showing up and first saying like we messed up, we killed people, we did this, like taking acknowledgement and then being like this actually happened. It's like I don't know. I haven't heard much of that. Like I've just heard more of just from my experience, like just hearing the good things that have been done for race, but not a
Mhm.
lot of like um acknowledgement or like what is it? Like authenticity around like we messed up. Like say that first. I don't know, like or put stories that are more closer to that. Like I don't know if that resonates, but that's just what was coming up for me just listening to you. So
Yeah. That leads to, like, to sum that up, it's white denial.
okay, that's it. That's the word. Okay, you
Right?
got it. Yeah,
It's white denial where people
right,
don't want to acknowledge the the racism or the systemic racism or whatever the case is.
right.
Just want to use their own lenses and everyone's equal. The world is perfect, but that's also denying the, I wouldn't even say mistakes, because
Mhm.
that was, each generation has their own way of being, right? So you can't correct the past, but you can learn from the past. But people that are denying any kind of wrongdoings, then that's just like white denial, and they don't want to take accountability for
Yeah.
moving forward with the movement and becoming educated and
Mhm.
things like that. So
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's a perfect sum with the right words I was looking for. Yeah, it does feel like that. It feels like there's a level of denial, and that's why we don't know about the level deeper that you're talking
mm,
about, like the people that came before. Um, but it's really great that you're shining a light on that and letting people understand it.
mhm,
And yeah, I guess it's challenging, like, for me as a person to really connect with it because it's like this stuff happened, I guess, the beginning of these things, and they happened long before I was born, and I have never personally witnessed it, like, in front of my eyes. And I feel like if I had witnessed it in front of my eyes, or if I was like born and I was in that white family that murdered that kid or whatever, like it would be so easy for me to like connect with it and completely understand it and like know the darkness to a deep level. But what can we do then? Because like for myself or other people that just find it harder to connect with it because of the reasons that I just said.
mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's just creating that sense of vulnerability
Mm,
in your own learning. Not every story is romanticized, and like it's not neat and tidy. There's lots of moving parts. There's lots of ugliness to history and racism, and
right.
even modern day racism. There's a lot of ugliness with what happened to George Floyd and people
right.
like that, Trayvon Martin. Like there's the list goes on, and people are in denial about it. So it's you
Mhm.
need to accept that um, this stuff is happening. It is based on race. It
Right.
is based on inequalities and inequities,
Yeah.
and you need to be willing to dive into it and really understand it from a historical point to a
Mhm.
more contemporary to modern, what however you want to say it. It's changed over time,
Mhm.
and we need to um, be willing. I think that's the biggest thing, is be willing to look at it and acknowledge it and speak to people about it. I mean, your voice is as important as mine, as everyone's voice is important in this process,
Right.
right? So, and people, especially white people, they feel like they can't speak on this topic,
Right.
which kind of slides into the white denial. But
Right.
their voice is just as powerful as a black man's voice or a black woman's voice,
Mm.
and they need to understand that.
Mm.
So
Mhm. Mhm. So what type of resources can we use, or what's out there that's easily accessible, or is it, I know you talked about that you've read books.
yeah, I mean, it's there. I mean, there's podcasts, there's things like that, but um, I know for me, it's new for the education system as an educator.
Okay.
Um, Textbooks are outdated, things like that. So
Mm.
um, this is where I create the divide between a teacher and an educator. A teacher will stick to those textbooks and not deviate from them. It's just this is history. This is what we're learning. Whereas an educator will go all over the place, going
Okay.
down different roads, right? And open up those hard conversations. And I know in one of my classes in particular, I have about five black students.
Yeah.
So I try to educate the class on that as well, not things that happen in the 13 colonies or New France
Yeah.
300 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I need to make it relevant to them today,
Mm.
because this is a society that they are going to be leaders in someday. Um, so to help to plant that seed and
Mhm.
watch it grow, I think is important. So,
Mhm.
but not everyone has that, right? So it's difficult. So things like King of Hearts, like that is a great outlet. Um,
Yeah.
I think like I have one-on-ones with Nuke and Hafiz
Yeah.
and those guys all the time. So
Yeah.
um, we're always bouncing ideas off of each other and chatting and getting different perspectives. And
Yeah.
it's the willingness to learn and the willingness to hear each other. Right? It's got to be reciprocated. It can't just be a one-way street. No, you're wrong. I'm right. It's what
Right.
do you have to offer to me, and what can I offer to you?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's very, 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 very powerful. And is definitely the foundations of what King of Hearts, like where we met, this organization is based on. It's like I've only been to 2 meetings, but I'm in love and I'm gonna go forever probably, but it's like every single time it's always highlighted, like, there's no right, there's no wrong, there's no judgments here, this is not a debate circle, like, this is where everyone gets to express themselves and be heard,
Mhm,
like, and if you're triggered, you keep that to yourself. It's
mhm.
which I guess is there's that mindfulness aspect, but it's like it's very powerful what you're doing and very fulfilling work, I can imagine, to just bring that into your school because you teach grade 7 social studies, you said? Is that what it is?
Social studies and language arts, yeah.
And language arts, yeah, so you have that, like, doorway in doing that, which is really beautiful, and I'm sure that you are planting some really powerful seeds in people that they can feel heard and feel understood. Because when I reflect back on social when I was younger, it's like, it was just all about the colonies. We learned a little bit about the, residential schools and the aboriginals and stuff like that, but it did feel like we were learning a lot of like just English perspective
Yeah, that Eurocentric point
Real.
of view.
Yeah, Eurocentric. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's got all the lingo. Um, but yeah, just and yeah, and like growing up and seeing what's going on now, it's like we almost feel robbed. Like I know me and people I know about, it's like and talk to, it's like we didn't learn this stuff. Like, why didn't we
Mhm.
learn this stuff? And you're almost like angry about it.
Yeah,
Because but yeah, I think that's a big part of what hopefully education will shift like going forward, because I know that being younger, and I just had this idea, I don't know if anyone ever told me, but I just figured like I'm learning everything I need to know in school. Like everything
mhm.
I need to know is being taught to me, and I fully trust the system. Like,
Yeah,
and then you grow up and you're like, "Whoa."
yeah,
Like, and then you start to feel like almost bad about it. But it
yeah,
wasn't
and
really
that's the tough
my
part.
fault.
That's
Sorry.
definitely the tough part of the education system is,
Yeah,
are we preparing them for reality,
right.
right? And that's a question that every school, every educator, every teacher, every principal has to ask themselves, are we preparing these students for their, I don't know what tests they have in Alberta, those standardized tests, but are
Yeah.
we preparing them for those, or are we preparing them for reality and life outside of school? Like
Mm.
that's a question that I don't know.
I'd say from my experience, it's more about the tests. I
Yeah.
feel like I was taught towards the test, not towards life. Uh,
Hmm.
but yeah, I just find that so powerful that you are taking that initiative to infuse that, and you are literally just at the forefront of breaking down how things were and trying to build them up, and how, you know, things maybe should be, that we understand more, we're more connected with reality, we are really feeling like we're learning what matters. And that's the beginning, right, where like all the difference is going to be made. So that's really good to hear.
Hmm.
Mhm. Mhm. Just to,
Yeah.
yeah, just allow people to the space, I guess, to be more authentic and real by getting information from sources that matter, right? And not um just taking so much from media and just seeing the movements as like all we need is the movements. Like now I can sit back because something's being done. Um,
Mhm.
and just being careful about the information you come across. So, yeah, is there any last words you want to say on that?
Yeah, actually. So this is something that I just kind of came across. I'm reading another book right now. It's called Why I Stopped Talking About Race to My White Friends or something like that.
Oh, this is interesting. Yeah, let's hear it.
So so there was a point in it that it talks about multicultural versus anti-racism. So it's
Multicultural. Okay, you're going to have to break those down.
so multicultural is basically accepting like these are training that we could do. So multicultural training, anti-racist training. So multicultural training is like accepting everyone
Mm,
and um, being mindful of everyone, whereas anti-racist training is entirely different,
mm,
right? So I've noticed that a lot of institutions are saying multicultural and be welcoming to everyone, but it's not actually tearing down the barriers of racism. It's not addressing racism. It's just saying, oh, you're Asian, oh, you're black, oh, you're indigenous, you're welcome here. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an underlying perspective on racism, or it still exists. It's ingrained in each and every one of us. So it's not addressing that. Being having multicultural training, you need to have that anti-racist racism training. So
okay, okay. So the multicultural is kind of feeling like the bypassing vibe.
yeah,
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 yeah. Okay. Yeah, I hear you. That's like an easy way to kind of like feel like you're doing something right,
exactly,
but
exactly.
really, like, are you? Like, maybe you're like, I don't know. It's so hard because it's so ingrained in us, and whether we, I don't know, I find this discrepancy sometimes between my mind and my heart, because my heart will feel like, you know, like it treat everyone equal, like there's no difference and like just show up with love, that's it. And
Yeah.
then the mind, because of the conditioning, is sometimes like, "Oh, no, you should be scared of that Black person." Even though
Yeah.
my heart is like, "Oh, like, you don't even know them. Let's just say hi and have a conversation like any other person." Like, that's what, your heart, like, instinctively wants to do, just connect with other humans, period. Like, kinda like kids, they don't really think about it, right? It's just like an instinctive, like, "'Kay, we're just gonna connect with other humans. That's it."
Yeah.
But then, like, the mind, when you get older, I've noticed it's like, "Oh, like, no, maybe I need to put a wall up because maybe I'm not gonna be safe or maybe whatever." And that's come up for me with Black people, even though I don't like it. I know it's not right,
Hmm.
but it's like something that within society somehow, maybe through media or movies or whatever I watched. And I watched one documentary on this. I forget what it's called. It's on Netflix, but it did show like the pieces of media from like way long ago and movies and all that type of stuff of like how they really, really made it out to make Black people look like scary animals. Like, you need
Hmm.
to run because 'cause you're gonna die if you see this person. So it just created this, like, huge fear, and I was blown away when I saw that one clip that just showed that they actually painted a white person black and then had that white person, like, act like a crazy animal and have all the white people be terrified of them, and then, like, put that out into society. Like, what do you think is gonna happen? Like,
Yeah.
everyone's gonna get freaked out even though there was no, like, truth
There-
behind that really.
yeah, there's no actual threat, and the threats
Mhm.
that do come from Black communities is because the communities are underfunded, they're underprivileged,
Yeah,
right? So they're at in a way they're like trying to survive. So if they do rob someone or if they do, you know, steal
yeah,
something, it's because society is not allowing them to thrive,
yeah,
right? The
yeah,
same type of opportunities that a white person would get, a black person will not have those same opportunities.
right.
And that is the issue, with that is the big, in my opinion, one of the bigger issues in society is
Mhm.
the the opportunities aren't the same, right?
Absolutely.
Even though everyone will say, "Oh, everyone is welcome, everyone is whatever," but it's
Mhm,
not. They're not the same,
mhm,
and that's why, I mean, seeing like you're talking about the movies and documentaries and stuff.
mhm.
That's why a lot of, even though it's somewhat unrealistic, but when Black Panther came out, right,
Okay,
we had our first Black superhero,
absolutely. Yeah,
right, and it was great. It was fantastic. No longer is
yeah,
the Black person the villain or kind of a bystander or whatever. They are the central role.
yes,
An entire Black community is a central role in a movie,
yeah,
right? And it's not about um, inefficiencies in the system or anything like that. They're actually a prosperous
mhm,
community,
mhm, mhm.
right? So it took hundreds of years, but we finally have a Black superhero that we can be proud of. And I think that in itself is tearing down a lot of barriers,
Mhm.
and I don't think it's going to do everything, but I think it's torn down quite a few barriers on how people see and perceive Black people for sure. So
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like just at the beginning of what you're saying, it sounds like society has created a system where like the Black are underprivileged and it's hard for them to get opportunity. And it's like you created that and then you created the fear around them. So it's like
mhm,
the whole thing is like it's like they didn't really have a say. It's like they've
yeah,
just been kind of thrown into this challenging place, and then here we are as like many like white people or like even people that are mixed race or even people that are different races are like now seeing them in those ways, and it
mhm,
almost, what it really does, I feel deeply, is like I don't know if it's the right word, but like dehumanizes them. Like you don't
Mhm.
see them as a human, you see them as like this threat or this
Yeah,
victim or whatever it is, and you don't see them eye to eye like you see other humans.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what I think makes it so easy to treat them differently because you have compartmentalized them, in a certain way. And I guess what was coming to me is just like how powerful media is. We know it, like movies, everything. It's like maybe that's a huge resource of how this is going to be turned around going forward. Like what you said about Black Panther. And I mean, race is just one aspect, I guess, of people that are not getting the same privilege as everybody else. Like there's also the gay community or like the woman versus men vibe, the whole thing. But I know for myself, like I wasn't surrounded by a lot of gay people growing up. Like I didn't, it wasn't really like in my everyday. But then once I started watching RuPaul, like I was obsessed with RuPaul. I just like, I think I've watched every single season and episode that's been out. And just watching them and seeing the humanity, right? Like RuPaul does a really good job of like having them speak about their stories, like show that they have tears, show that they have love, show that they have like all the human attributes and qualities that we all have. Like they're not different.
Hmm.
They're not meant to be compartmentalized into just this person that's just gay and that means we can do anything to them. It's like no, like they're a human, they feel everything you do. And for me, like it really helped just binge watching that season to
Hmm.
really see them as humans and to really like break down that sort of that judgment or that wall or that like quick type of thing that comes up because of conditioning. Again, not because my heart wants it, but because of
Yeah.
conditioning. So I know for myself, like I haven't had a lot of Black friends. I haven't been a lot around a lot of Black people. But for me, I feel like it's probably going to be the most potent to actually just spend time with them, like as humans, or even just watch lots of shows with them in it and really connect with them. And like this, you're a full human, like you're not a threat. Like, like I think it's really powerful, and maybe media has that opportunity to change things on a mass scale that way too. So,
Well, I think going back to that they're a full human, and the other book that I'm reading, the new Jim Crow, during the slavery days, which wasn't so long ago, um, black people are actually seen as three-fifths of a human.
oh
So
yeah,
they weren't even seen as a full human being. So
yeah,
I think some people have still kind of carried on that mindset that a black person isn't a full person, right? That the color of their skin is whatever. But
hmm,
not so long ago, they were only seen as three-fifths of a person.
yeah,
So I mean, we think we're far removed from slavery, but we're actually in modern day slavery, which
mm.
is a whole new topic, but
We'll
it's a whole
have to
different
have
topic.
another chat. We're gonna have you back.
Yeah.
Uh,
So like I'm really diving into that too, modern day slavery. So
yeah.
it's yeah, it's pretty interesting.
You want to touch on that? Maybe a couple sentences.
Uh, prison,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
prison. That's the best
Hmm.
example I can give is prison is a very big example of modern day slavery,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
which is very unfortunate.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm. Right. Okay, well, maybe say a couple more sentences. I'm sure who's ever listening to this is like, I want to know more now.
well, I mean, prison is a way that big corporations get their items, right? They have uh, work programs in prison, and like I do know I have never been to prison, but my biological mom's like ex-boyfriends and ex-husband have been to prison, so I've went to visit them in prison, so
Okay.
I could see the environment there, and
Yeah,
yeah, so they have working programs where, you know what, places like Walmart, places like these big corporations, they're getting products for little to nothing
right.
unless they're going overseas and doing that, but a lot of prisons, even call centers, some are from prisons,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So it's modern day slavery. They're not being paid very much, just like slavery. They weren't being paid very much, but
Yeah,
they were still producing a product.
right,
And that is the same as today. It's they're in there and they're doing manual labor and they're not being paid very much, if anything. And they're big corporations are getting their products.
right. Absolutely. And then like the proportion of people who are Hispanic, I guess, or black is way more in prisons than white. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like some people may think, "Oh, they deserve that. They did a crime that was horrible, blah blah blah." But like I think you can speak to that I believe that a lot of them are thrown in for not doing crimes that they didn't commit it. Like there was something or it was something small and like they would have let a white person off, but the black person, the Hispanic person's in jail.
Yeah, yeah. So there's tons of cases about that.
Mhm.
Um, one case in particular. I don't know how much time we have left, but um,
We have no time. Well, I don't even know how long we've been talking, but this is such a juicy conversation. So, anyways, keep
one
going.
story in particular that kind of stands out to me and
Yeah.
infuriated me. I think this was the first time I've looked at a trial in a case, and I was very infuriated.
Okay. Okay.
Um, it was a 16-year-old was driving drunk
Mhm.
and killed four people, a family of four.
Mm.
Um, and he went to court, went to trial and whatnot, and he received, I think it was something like 5 years of probation.
Oh
I
wow.
And their argument, which blew me away how this could stand up in a judicial system,
Mhm.
was he suffered from affluenza. So he was too rich to know better.
What?
Yeah.
Are
So I
you
was just like,
serious? Is that real?
yeah, yeah. So he suffered from affluenza that his parents didn't teach him
Oh
right from
wow.
wrong. Like he didn't know better. So he killed four people, got probation, not even jail time, not even anything, probation. So it's like, how is the justice system fair to black people when there's cases like that out there
Yeah.
that where black people are even being framed and being sent to prison for 30, 40 years before they're exonerated.
Right.
Um, and DNA comes back and they had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's so many of those. Um, like there's program like the Innocence Project and things like that in the States where they're actually working these cases of people that were sent to prison that shouldn't be in prison,
Yeah.
right? So the real murderers or the real
Yeah.
perpetrators are still out there, but they needed someone, and it's usually a black person.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Because I mean, it's easy for the police and for the system to pick a black person because everybody already thinks, "Oh yeah, of course. Oh yeah." Like that makes
Yeah.
sense. And it's
And
easy.
what resources does a black person have? They're getting public defenders rather than lawyers that are
Yeah.
costing $1,000 an hour or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
They're getting public defenders that are just like, well, another one. Like, what are we gonna do? I'm still getting paid. Like, I don't care,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And that boy who killed the 4 people was white, I'm guessing?
White and affluent. Yeah.
And, like, under the age of 18, I don't know how it works with, like, under and over the age 18, but it just seems like that's so beyond anything that's fair.
I
So,
think in some cases they can be tried as adults, and I think in that case he should have been tried as an adult. But I mean,
yeah.
I'm just a lowly teacher that
No,
doesn't have any push to pull. So
that's fair, but you have a big message to spread here, and, like, this is a lot,
mhm.
that we need to be educated on, so yeah. So Colin has, yeah, so beautifully, I think, just helped us understand that we need to get real and do the proper research and to understand what's going on beneath the layers.
Mhm.
Um, And yeah, I know we're been talking for a while, but I have one last question to ask you.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
what do we do as like I'm partially white or like white people? Like, what do we do with just reading this stuff and then like immediately like guilt, shame, like these feelings kind of come up, or like we feel like just so bad because maybe we didn't do anything personally, but we feel like we're linked to a generation of people who really messed up. And now we feel like in some way we're responsible, which we are. Everyone's responsible in some way. But what do we do with those feelings of guilt or sadness or whatever it is? Because I guess like when we're conscious and aware and we know that we have more privilege than other people, I feel like my heart, maybe other people's too, just feels like guilty about it in some way. It's like I don't know how to describe it, but it's almost like that feeling sometimes kind of blocks in some way to learn more because you're like, oh gosh, it just feels horrible. And I've heard like some people say that, we need to forgive ourselves and our ancestors or whatever it is. But I don't know, just whatever comes up for you with that. I'm curious to hear what we can do to address that as we learn this knowledge.
I would say use that as fuel,
Mm,
right? Use it as fuel to be the voice to make that change,
right,
right? I don't think any of us in modern day society are directly related to slavery, but
right,
I mean it is part of the history, right? Um, and so I think if we can be that voice for the next generation, and that will help us, kind of that will help us create new pathways,
hmm,
in our own brains, right? So I'm a big advocate for neuroplasticity, right? So it's if you're shaming yourself, or if you think you're racist, or if you're, like, you have the ability to change those pathways, just like in
right,
reality you have those abilities to change those pathways. You don't have to walk down the same pathways that your grandparents did or your great grandparents did, or
right,
whatever the case is. You make your own path, and you be that voice that is going to make a difference, right? Because every voice does make a difference, in society. And if the voices are all racist, well, then that's going to be a
right,
powerful voice. If
right.
there's pushback to that racist voice,
Mhm.
then you're going to have that sense of equity coming back,
Yeah.
right? So
Thank you. I love that. I love just use it as power, use it as fuel. Like, it comes back to just everything's energy, I guess. Like, maybe
yep.
it's not energy you want or like, but it's energy and it
Hmm.
can be directed. So yeah, this was such a powerful conversation, and I hope that we all know a little bit deeper, like just how powerful each of us is. Like every single person's voice matters. You matter. What you know matters. How you show up matters. Um, and yeah. So thank you so much, Colin. This was deep and nourishing and insightful and awakening for me, and I'm sure everybody else who's listening.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to any future talks we can have. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like you just opened the can. So probably have Colin back. All right. Thank you so much, my beautiful listeners, eyes of the wheel, and we'll see you next time.